invasion and devastation of Ukraine has lasted longer than anyone expected. Yet, the way it unfolded has followed tactical and operational characteristics that have repeated themselves over centuries, known as the Russian way of war. Russia is rarely well prepared for war, but proves to be resilient. Inept at the outset, Russians persist and learn. Awful at short wars, Moscow has achieved impossible victories as wars dragged on. In World War II, called the Great Patriotic War to Russians, Joseph Stalin refused to believe Nazi Germany would attack, and an unprepared Red Army lost millions of men in weeks. Russia seemed bound to lose the war. Instead, the USSR created 17 armies from scratch and, 4 years later, took Berlin. Second, Russian forces are clumsy on the offense, but stalwart on defense, as opponents over the centuries have learned. In the Russo-Japanese War, Tokyo had all the apparent advantages, including surprise. Yet the dogged Russian defense of Port Arthur upset the Japanese timetable and, over months, drained irreplaceable manpower. Instead of a clear-cut victory, Japan had to settle for a surly peace. Third, whether Tsars, commissars, or presidential dictators lead the Kremlin, they do not hesitate to sacrifice soldiers' lives. A clumsy giant is still a giant, and the Russians pile on. Massive firepower reinforces struggling infantry units. What they lack in finesse, the Russians replace with high explosives and a willingness to absorb mass casualties. Lastly, Russians have a sharp vision for how the post-war environment should look, subservient to Russia at all costs. Moscow will go to breathtakingly savage lengths to shape that future. In the early days of World War II, Russia's NKVD secret police executed over 20,000 Polish officer POWs, capable men who might have resisted the USSR's plans for post-war Poland. Today, in Ukraine, Putin's strategy involves destroying Ukrainian identity and society, no matter the cruelty required. The Russian way of war views the opposing military as a hindrance, but its true enemy is always the opposing society. The key historical lesson is that time is on Russia's side, not Ukraine's. Just as the Red Army of 1945 was not the bumbling force of 1941, so will the Russian military of 2025 prove to be more capable than its hollow force of 2022. Ukraine needs our unstinting support now. As China looks to coercively bring Taiwan back under its control, the United States would do well to remember the foreign policy mistake that was the Atchison Line and the consequences of being non-committal to our allies. Early in the Cold War, on January 12, 1950, U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson defined the boundaries of America's military protection in Eastern Asia. This defense perimeter came to be known as the Atchison Line and ran from Alaska to the Philippines. It included both Japan and the Philippines, but Korea and Taiwan were notably excluded. The line was meant to deter Stalin and Mao from expanding communism in the region. Instead, it announced to the communist powers exactly where America's security commitments ended and informed them where they could expand their regional footprints without fear of U.S. resistance or retaliation. The consequences were immediate and immense. Prior to 1950, the Soviet Union was reluctant to support North Korea's plan to invade South Korea for fear of U.S. involvement. 6 months after Acheson's speech, the Korean War began with Stalin's support. Over the next few decades, communist forces backed by the Soviet Union and China moved into Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. triggering a series of civil wars that brought on the communist expansion the Atchison Line was intended to prevent. Ironically, the United States ended up supporting armed resistances in many countries that were not originally included in the Atchison Line. Even seemingly minor policy shifts like Atchison's speech can have profound and lasting impacts on geopolitical stability. His declaration was nearly 75 years ago, but its failure to include Korea left the country irreparably split in two, with those in North Korea living in poverty and oppression. Its failure to include Taiwan and recognize Taiwanese independence has led to unresolved issues we are still dealing with today. China currently seeks to reclaim Taiwan under its authoritarian rule, and the U.S. cannot afford a repeat of 1950. As a key political, economic, and military ally in East Asia, Taiwan's sovereignty is critical to regional stability and U.S. national security. To that end, America must adopt a long-term strategy that supports Taiwan and invests in its self-defense capabilities. America must project strength and maintain a committed presence to curb China's ambitions and build a lasting peace in the region. Why does Russia fight so many expansionary wars? When the Eastern Roman Empire fell to Muslim Turks in 1453, Ivan the Great and the powerful rising Russian state proclaimed itself to be the Third Rome, successor to Byzantium and protector of Orthodox Christianity. Since this moment, Russia has mythologized its own existence as the guardian to Rome's legacy, a destined defender of a morally superior civilization. It is from this belief that Russia became an expansionist aggressor state, fueled by religious imperialism and secular evangelism. The willingness to sacrifice millions of soldiers and civilians was born out of this religious ethos. But it has become so culturally ingrained that, even in its secular present-day form, Russia believes victory, at any cost, is all that matters. Well before the Soviet Union formed in 1922, imperialist Russia had a long history of expanding its borders to create buffers against rival powers like Great Britain, France, and even the Ottoman Empire. During the Soviet era, and even now, Russia has maintained this strategy to expand its sphere of influence and protect itself against NATO and the West, which Russia has long perceived as morally bankrupt. It supports this buffer strategy by exerting control over the separatist regions of its neighbors and by preventing countries like Ukraine from aligning with the West. Naval access and control of the Baltic, Black, and Mediterranean seas, as well as the Pacific Ocean, also play a key role in Russia's buffer strategy because they are invaluable for military mobility and trade flow. To that end, Crimea and Ukraine are both highly important for Russia's maritime ambitions. Successfully helping Ukraine requires understanding Russia's cultural and geopolitical drives, just as much as understanding Russia's military strategy and logistics.
With conflict in Ukraine, the Middle East, and a looming invasion of Taiwan by China, America stands on the brink of 3 proxy wars. America must recall its past proxy war successes and failures before committing further to one or all 3. Failure to do so could be catastrophic. Proxy wars are nothing new. City-states of ancient Greece and Republican and Imperial Rome used surrogates, partners, and allies to further their interests and fight on their behalf. During the American Revolutionary War, the French provided crucial financial and military support to American revolutionaries. facilitating American independence and weakening their British rivals. In the nuclear age, proxy wars have become increasingly common. During the Cold War, to avoid nuclear conflict, the United States and the Soviet Union found themselves locked in a series of proxy wars against one another, always managing to avoid direct confrontation. And why not? Proxy wars can have significant benefits. When executed effectively, sponsor nations avoid direct casualties, contain the conflict to distant regions, and prevent escalation. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to support the new communist government against widespread rebellion. The U.S. entered the fray to support the anti-communist Mujahideen, economically straining the USSR for over 10 years and contributing to its ultimate collapse. But when proxy wars are ill-conceived, poorly planned, or mismanaged, financial, political, and cultural destruction are often the result. At the outset of Vietnam, the United States initially avoided direct military involvement, supporting anti-communist South Vietnam with money, weapons, and advisors. But as Stalin and Mao's support of northern communist forces grew, America was gradually drawn into the conflict directly. Without a comprehensive strategy or clearly defined goals, among other strategic mistakes, the war cost the U.S. billions of dollars, 50,000 American lives, and created cultural upheaval at home, only for the U.S. to eventually withdraw and let Saigon fall to the communists. Today, the United States finds itself committed to one proxy war and on the knife's edge of two more. And while proxy wars may have common threads, no two are alike. A recipe for success in Ukraine may constitute a recipe for failure in Taiwan. America must first fully understand the nature of each potential proxy war on the horizon and develop clearly articulated goals with a comprehensive strategy to avoid proxy warfare's unintended, escalating, and devastating consequences.
The United States is facing an increasingly dangerous political landscape, with the real possibility of another world war in the near future. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have emerged as a new Axis powers, reminiscent of Hitler's Germany, Mussolini's Italy, Imperial Japan, and Stalin's Soviet Union. With global peace and stability at stake, the U.S. can effectively challenge this new axis through a better understanding of the original. The original axis was loosely bound not by trust or ideology, but mostly through self-interested opportunism. Germany and Italy fought in World War I, but as Germany took ground in World War II, Mussolini saw his own chance to expand Italy's power and joined the Axis. Japan saw alignment with Germany as a way to strengthen its expansion in Asia and the Pacific. Stalin, not naive about Hitler, still signed a non-aggression pact with Germany to acquire weapons, expand Soviet territory, and avoid conflict with the Soviets' old enemy, Japan. This, of course, did not stop Hitler from invading the Soviet Union, ultimately driving Stalin to join the Allies. Despite being a formal alliance, the First Axis lacked a unified strategy and rarely operated together, leading to its ultimate failure. Today, the authoritarian, militaristic, and expansionist nations of the new Axis are united by disdain for America and the West. Evidenced by Russia's invasion of Ukraine against Western Europe and NATO, Iran's proxy military strikes against Israel, China's potential military takeover of Taiwan, and North Korea's nuclear threats against the US. Unlike World War II, this new, though informal axis is far more strategically cooperative than its predecessor. Across the powers, we see no-limit partnerships, joint military operations, and ballistic missile programs, and even joint railways and natural gas pipelines. Rather than declare war on the United States, This new axis will likely do everything possible to deter American involvement, but they are also unlikely to fall apart or fracture on their own. Thankfully, despite the cooperation of the new axis, these nations fail to share common bonds beyond American and Western resentment. This weakness is our strength. America and its allies have a shared vision of peace and freedom. Our opportunity is to strengthen these bonds with current allies, prioritize theaters of war where U.S. military strength and support for our allies is strongest, and maintain strategic adaptability to meet evolving threats. It might mean the difference between a second Cold War or a third World War.